Welcome to the Marshall Pruett podcast and your Week in Sports Cars interview show. This almost could have been a Week in IndyCar interview show, knowing how good this guy is. We're talking to our friend John Edwards. Say a big thanks, John, as always, to our partners at Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers, TorontoMotorsports.com and Discount Tire. Take great care of us here on the show. And I guess the news is out, as I have written, and I don't know if it's craftily written, but I tried to at least come up with an opening paragraph that was amusing for a story here. John Edwards has called time on his career as a professional race car driver. That might be wrong, so you'll have to correct me if you're still going to do this. Sneak out there. The 2008 Star Mazda and 2009 Atlantic Championship title winner will trade the use of inverted wings in cockpits to race on the ground for cockpits and wings used for flight. And you want to become a pilot. You've already been a pilot, but in a professional capacity. And I figure we should start there, John, and then maybe we'll go back a little bit and talk about some of the great highlights of your career. But how'd you get here? And will I never see you at a racetrack again? Come on, man.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I guess it took stepping away from motorsport to finally earn an invite onto the show, but happy to be here either way.
Dude, we've done so many things over the years. Come on. But you raise a great point, and I suck.
I had to give you a hard time.
No,
but,
I suck. I suck.
You know, bravo on the title. I love the inverted wings title. I think you should stick with that if you do any print articles about it. But yeah, it's an interesting time in my life. You know, I've raced my whole life since I was 8 years old, and you know, starting go-karts was just kind of father-son bonding at the beginning, and never dreamed that it would evolve into what it was. But you know, as you get through life, you start to look at what's next and what's the future hold. And I think every driver in the back of our minds, you know, we wonder what we're going to do post driving, because ultimately, unless you're making the Formula One salaries of you know, tens of millions of dollars, you know, we're going to have to still work after we're done driving, essentially. So it's always been in the back of my mind, as it is for everybody. You know, a lot of guys obviously go on to announce or go on to do a lot of coaching, or, you know, some guys obviously find an AM guy and keep their driving career going a little bit longer, you know, even once they're done with some factory stuff. But for me, I've always had or I shouldn't say always, but since the first year of my BMW career, I found a passion for flying. And so it really paid off well, because I was able to use my travel budget to build hours and get my time by flying myself to all the races. I had a little Cirrus, a little prop plane. And so I got about 13 or 1400 hours by, I guess it was October or November of last year. And as I started to kind of plan my future, you know, I had a contract through this year with BMW, and as you get through that final year of a contract, you know, you always start talking about what's next. And so I had to think about that and kind of reckon with myself on what I wanted from my driving career, and whether it was time to make the step. And ultimately, it happened a lot sooner than I really expected it to happen. You know, something that was in the back of my mind for a few years, but I really thought that I would take driving as far as I could take it, and have to get, you know, kicked out involuntarily to finally make the transition, just because it's been such a big part of my life. But ultimately, you know, at this point, there's a huge pilot shortage, and pilot salaries are going up, and the time to start as a pilot, if you have your hours, has never been better. And, you know, you've never been able to say that about race car driving, because there's just way more drivers than there are seats. And so you're always fighting tooth and nail to earn your spot, keep your spot. You know, and I've seen the good and the bad sides of that. I've been very lucky in my career to be in the right place at the right time, but I've also seen a lot of guys lose rides mid-season. I've seen, you know, I've seen my program get cut for reasons out of my control. I've seen myself get dropped from the Red Bull program for reasons that were certainly within my control when I didn't perform. So I've seen all the good and bad of it. And ultimately, as I looked into the future, I just had a daughter. I've got a really happy life with a family now. And as we started kind of planning our future, decided now's the time to make the step over. And the only thing I'll clarify from your comments, Marshall, is that I've been very careful not to mention the word retirement, because to me, even the guys that say they retire, you suddenly see pop back up occasionally. So, I'm someone who is making a decision that I'm very comfortable with, and I'm confident that I'm going to be happy with what I've decided. But I still love driving race cars. I mean, you can't say that it's not a good time, right? So I would love the opportunity to step back in and help a team out at Daytona, or even a full endurance season in the future if the schedule lined up for me. And that time might not be now; it might be a ways down the road. But I still love driving race cars, and I'd welcome any opportunity to step back in the future.
I don't think Terrell Owens has caught a pass in the NFL in like 20 years, but that guy is constantly trying to find a way back in at like 850 or whatever. And, again, I'm sure my numbers are off a little bit, but like, point taken of like, look, your God-given talent, which has always been outrageous, that hasn't gone away. This isn't the, lost a step, market's really full, all these young punks who just do the gym, tan, sim life and nothing else. Too many of those to keep fighting off, so I'll do this now. I love the fact that at 32, right, you're still a young guy. And I'm not saying you haven't, taken some lumps over the years. Every race car driver with a long career has had some crashes and some injuries, but, you're not all busted up with half a knee left and your back fall. Like, you're in great shape. You're young. You have a name and reputation that is at the highest level, and you are deciding this is what is best for you. I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyways. Do you realize, John, how rare it is? Factory driver, decade with BMW, done all these amazing things, and you are getting to choose the terms of how at least this first long chapter of your racing career comes to an end. And again, we might have you back in a couple months at wherever else, but are you aware of how rare this is, brother? Because, boy, you and I know a lot of folks who are hanging on well past their best days and are clinging for any way to scrape an income through. You making this call, I love everything about it because you own it.
Yeah, and I do realize how rare it is, and I think that's why, candidly, my wife was probably sick of me bringing it up when we were having these discussions, because she's the person whose opinion I respect the most, and she's the person who's going to have to live with me if I'm unhappy with the decision I've made for myself and for our family. So, at one point, I remember we went for a walk, and I started talking to, okay, well, if I did this and I did, and she was like, please, how many times are we going to have this conversation? Just do it already. You've talked yourself in and out of it a million times, and you just keep trying to justify it for your own self, for your own mind. And I think that's why once I made that decision, and especially now that the news has come out, she actually asked me last night. I was getting a ton of messages, and she was kind of reminiscing, posting some old photos, from her first time coming to a race of mine. And, a bunch of people were posting things and sending me stuff. And, she said, I'm kind of sad now. I know that you're happy and this is your decision, but aren't you a little sad? And I was like, not at all. She was like, do you just not ever feel anything? I said, no, I just am confident in my decision. I know, we've talked through this, and I think that it's not difficult for me because I'm not leaving to go sit at a desk and slog through something that I hate doing, because I can't imagine working a desk job. And I, frankly, when I was 21 or 22, before I signed 20 or 21, before I signed my BMW contract, and I was still driving for Stevenson, and it was a private team, and you never know what the future holds in that environment. I was a little panicked at that point because I had no idea what I would do if I wasn't driving. But at that point, I had never taken a flight lesson, and I'd never really considered that as an option for a career. So, now that I'm able to start somewhere that is a really cool place to fly, I'm flying at NetJets now, and so they fly really cool planes. We get really cool trips, great destinations, a huge variety of flying. We fly into big airports, we fly into small airports, and so I'm excited about that aspect of things, and so I'm really just looking forward. And I think it's, I know it's rare, and I think I wasn't really sure if there was going to be a big hoopla about it. I've never been the hoopla guy about my own stuff anyway. So I wasn't really sure if there was going to be much talk about it. And the response yesterday when the article came out, or I guess 2 nights ago when the article came out, and then all through the day yesterday, I had a ton of messages and calls, and it kind of made me realize, to your point, how rare it is and how shocked everyone was. So, there's a handful of people that obviously already knew, but to those that hadn't heard, I think everybody just expected, I'd be in a GTD car or, back in SRO or something like that. And so I think it came as a huge surprise to everybody, and that helped me realize how rare it is.
I got to mention something here because my brain had something stuck in it. So I don't know exactly what episode number this is going to be when it goes up. My most recent was episode 1458. So this will be 459 or 460. But I had to look it up. OG John Edwards, episode 86. You were within the first 100. John Edwards on his first BMW DTM test.
Oh, man.
Right? From December 10th. So this is almost however many days to the year.
I wasn't counting on you having receipts.
It's okay. Look, it's fair enough. I suck. We know that. But December 10, 2016. So you were within my first 100 podcast, dude. So there you go. There's affirmation of the long-standing love.
That's a great memory. That was one of the coolest cars I got to drive. So that was a fun day.
So we're not farewelling you from the sport, thankfully. What are you getting to fly, by the way? You mentioned NetJets, but I don't know if we're talking 777s or are you getting to fly big stuff, fun stuff, smaller jets?
Definitely fun stuff. I'm flying a Citation Latitude, and so I know this is a racing podcast, but the avionics on that plane are incredible. Lots of screens, lots of gadgets inside, and we basically go about the same speed as a commercial flight. But it only holds 6 people comfortably and 8 people if you use the couple extra seats. So small crowds on the plane. Usually I think on average we have under 2 people, like it's a 1.8 average or something like that. So occasionally we'll fill the plane, but usually it's just 1 or 2 people that are flying. And like I said, we're going all over. We fly up high. We fly at 45,000 feet. Quite a bit, and we'll do everything from cross country flights from California to New York, or yesterday I went from Washington DC out to Las Vegas, and we'll do it all, but then we'll also reposition from one airport to another for a 6-minute flight that gets really busy in the cockpit. So we kind of get to taste it all, and it's a really fun time.
The other thing that I love here is, so I've been doing this since I was 16. I don't know. We're not too far away from that being I'm a couple years away from it being 40 years of my life doing this. And the one thing that I wish I could make disappear is the travel part. Oh my God, airports and TSA. And I realize as a pilot, you might have kind of the executive pass in a lot of places, but I love the fact that the one thing you ask most racers who have busy schedules that they just hate and saps their energy, it's the travel and flying. So what does Edwards do? Oh yeah, I'm going to make it my my new profession here. But I guess the cool part And the other thing, which again wears on you after many years in motor racing, is, I'm already thinking about the upcoming Roar Before the 24 and Rolex 24. So these are now back-to-back weekends, which means you'll fly in on a Wednesday or whatever. And since I live all the way on the other side of the country, I'm not going to go back and then fly back. I'll stay out. So I'm already thinking about this 10, 12, 13-day long trip. And it wears on you after a full season. As you know, John, your loved ones are like, geez, are you home? I know you're here physically, but are you here mentally? Because you got to turn back around a couple days. Even though you're going from Washington to Las Vegas to here or wherever, it sounds like you're getting a lot more opportunities to earn a living, yet sleep in your own bed, maybe more on a more frequent basis than when you're a full-time racer.
Yeah. So, and look, I mean, this isn't the reason I chose to do it, but I think it is a positive of the switch. As you said, it really wears on you. I think Daytona, everybody used to complain that it was right after New Year's, so you couldn't really enjoy Christmas and New Year's, especially the crews were just overloaded, working through the holidays. And a lot of times we're having to travel on January 1st. And then, so the answer really for the logistics was to move it to back-to-back weekends, and that just made the whole week even longer, as you point out. So, I think for me as a driver, having to prepare for that stuff and, not just, you got to stay fit physically, mentally, you got to be ready, you got to recharge, and you got to be ready to attack and really perform at your body's limit and the car's limit. And that takes a lot out of you. And I've been doing that my whole life. But it really, you put a lot on yourself in all of those situations. I say that every race weekend you go to, and more than Daytona, for me in the spring and summer, that's when I would get really busy because we were doing Nürburgring, we were doing IMSA, and we were testing, and everything would just sort of line up right together. And it's certainly not a complaint, for me to say that they forced me to go do Nürburgring. That was the most fun I would have all year, was racing at the ring. But the travel, as you point out, takes a huge toll on you. And so for me now, making the switch to flying, NetJets is pretty cool. Unlike airlines, you can choose to be on a 7-7 schedule or an 8-6 schedule. So, you can work for 7 days, and your work starts as soon as you leave your house, and your work ends when you get home. So that includes the travel time it takes to get to wherever your jet is for that week. So I'll leave the house, I'll be gone for 7 days, and then I'm home for 7 days. And in those 7 days that I'm home, I'm not thinking about flying. I'm not stressing about what am I going to do next week, because that's scheduling's problem. They're going to figure it all out. That's somebody else. And I don't have to worry when I show up to work, how am I going to perform mentally? I mean, I say that, of course you have to, as a pilot, be on top of your mental game, but you're not being measured in terms of 0.2 of a second, and if you're 2 or 3 tenths off in qualifying, you're disappointed. And if you're 5 or 6 tenths off, you lose your job, so if we land half a second late, the passengers in the back don't notice at this point. So, it's really interesting for me to start flying and be able to do something that I enjoy, something that takes some serious focus when you're in critical phases of flight, but there's not that pressure to perform it at your absolute limit all the time.
This is so fascinating, I can come home, John. This is so fascinating. No, I mean it.
I can come home, and we have a 3-month-old baby at home, so I can come home and, I throw my work phone in the bag and lock it in the closet, because I don't need to look at it till the next time I go out. So, when you're in motorsport, I mean, I had a personal trainer. I use PitFit up in Cornelius, and you'd be in there 2 or 3 times a week. You'd be biking on your own time, and you'd be, always thinking about what went wrong the last weekend and how you were going to be better. How was the team going to be better, and how could you help them achieve that? It takes a lot out of you, just sort of the worrying as well as the preparation. And so it's been kind of an interesting change of pace for me to be on a cadence, and if we started, talking about the schedule, just one last point on that is, like, in the spring, I would be gone 10 or 12 weekends in a row, and I might come home for 2 or 3 days, or almost always would come home 2 or 3 days in the middle but then you're back out for 4 or 5 days again. And so that time at home,
and you're preparing for that next event, whether it's writing reports on the last, preparing for the next,
sleeping.
Yeah.
I mean, if you did the 24 hours of Spa or Nürburgring, and then you're on a flight home and you go straight to a test at Watkins Glen from the 24 hour, and then you come home for a few days, and then you're going out to a race again. I mean, sometimes you just got to sleep, and, you might have a honey-do list to get done at home, and, you want to see your friends and you want to have a date night, and you've only got 2 or 3 days to do it all. So, something has to give in all of that. And you ultimately just need your rest. So, at this point, with flying, because I won't have these big breaks off in the winter, I will be gone more days, or more nights, I should say, than I was racing, but it's all on an even cadence, so I'm just as busy in the wintertime as I am in the summertime. And I think that's what really drained me personally, and certainly what drained, or what would drain, my family, I think, in the future. So it's nice knowing that, when I go out, I'm going to come home and I'm going to be able to enjoy my time at home as well. So again,
less guilt too. And definitely. I say that as someone who's spent, again, most of his adult life on the road,
yeah, exactly.
Like whether it's a girlfriend, your wife, your whatever, your spouse, your loved one, like you come home and you're like, okay, I'm a terrible human being, because in order for me to do the thing that allows us to live and support us, I have to be selfish, and I'm going to monitor that. But as you said, I'd love to repaint this and cut the grass. Like, I gotta sleep, because if I can't do the thing that supports us, then they don't let me have money anymore or a job. So again, you're always in a war of like, I'm a terrible human being because I want to give you my love and time, but gosh, I have to be selfish. Otherwise, again, it's
and you want to, you want to have those date nights, and you want to spend time with the people that you care about when you're home, but sometimes you just don't have the energy. So and then the problem for me is that I'd come home for the wintertime, and from Petite to Daytona, you might do 1 or 2 tests, and I'd be going stir crazy. It's like if you leave your phone plugged in for 2 months, it's still just going to be at 100%. You can't charge it to 500%. So I felt the same. Once I was home for 2 or 3 weeks, I'd be itching to go, to go do something and have an objective. But you'd kind of sit around waiting, and then all of a sudden you'd just be super busy. So again, I want to emphasize it's an interesting conversation, and I know that you understand it, Marshall, but it's certainly not the reason I chose to do what I'm doing. It's just, I would say, a little bonus for me that makes it a little bit easier.
I want to get into another thing, which I think might be fascinating. So you have spent all these years becoming this hyper-focused athlete, where your mental processing rate is at a Hertz number of 1 trillion compared to the average person. You are accustomed to judging space, time, distance. Things are happening at 200 miles an hour for you. You're placing vehicles within, seemingly an inch or millimeters of the same apex point, lap after lap. You're doing all of these things that require you to be just like warp speed mentally, physically matching that with physical movements that are not only precise, machine-like, but super rapid. I would think taking a John Edwards and dropping him into the cockpit of a jet would be a miraculous marriage of pre-existing skills. Tell me about that, though, because I also think, John, of like long-haul drivers in Australia going from Eastern Australia to WA to Western Australia, and it's 20 zillion hours long of effectively going in a straight line, same exact landscape, and the number of fatalities there are crazy because it's hours of droning monotony and seeing the same thing. And so part of me wonders, for someone like you, who's used to being attuned to that mental processing rate at 1 million miles an hour and physical movements constantly and doing this for hours on end, what do you do with all that, where getting a plane up and effectively somewhat still, and a lot of probably clouds and the same things to stare at. Has that been a hindrance? Has your racing training been a positive? Like, where does that go? Because it seems so radically different than the immediacy of barreling into turn one, start of the Rolex 24 with 15 or 20 other crazy people around you and managing that immediacy.
Well, so it's sort of two different questions. I think the first is motorsport and how does that prepare you for the critical phases of flight, which is what you go through in all of the training. You never sit there and cruise in the sim, with the autopilot on. They're throwing engine failures at you. They're throwing, emergency checklists and emergency descents because the cabin depressurized and all that type of stuff in the sim. And I would say motorsport is the best way to prepare for something like that, aside from just being a pilot. So that was a huge help. My experience with multitasking in the car, being at the limit and changing dials and doing things in the car if your strategy is changing and you're going to fuel save mode and, okay, now we need to push and you need to change this, that ability to think while driving, is I would say directly applicable to flying. So that part of it was a big help. The rest you're asking about being in cruise, to me, or in a climb, basically when you're on autopilot, I think in Australia, the guys driving at 20 zillion hours, they get bored, they fall asleep, or they make a mistake because they're having to hold it just straight and steady. We've got autopilot for that part of the flight. And the big thing for pilots when you're in that phase of flight with the autopilot on is knowing what you've programmed and recognizing when the plane's not doing what you want it to do. So you're essentially in a monitoring phase. So that critical phase of flight where you're on the controls is a lot different than the sort of monitoring phase. And what I've told people about flying, and the reason I love it so much, is that it although there's some short intervals where you have to be really on your game, you're communicating with your partner, there's a lot of call outs, there's a lot of things to do on taxi out and takeoff, and then on landing and approach, especially in the clouds and at busy airports, and then down to landing. There's a lot to do in the cockpit, and that's spread out by long phases of what you're describing as boredom. And the answer is, I'll get up and make an espresso in the back. You're able to rely on your partner, because in those less critical phases of flight, you can get up and have just one pilot in the cockpit, as I'm sure you've seen on commercial flights when they get up and swap and things like that. So, it's sometimes on a long flight, 5.5 hours. Sometimes it's a little bit boring, but then you come over the mountains and you see the snow on the Rockies after the first snow of the year, and that's what we had last night coming into Vegas over the Rockies, and it was just beautiful. So I really enjoy the views, and I tell people I describe flying for me is a lot more like, the mindset is a lot more like scuba diving, where control your breathing, stay calm, you're doing stuff and you're looking at stuff, and you have to take action and do things, but you're not at the physical limit. You're not overloaded and oversaturated at least in the non-critical phases of flight. So for me, it's a much more of a zen activity than motorsport. It's definitely not the adrenaline kick that you get at a 4 a.m. restart at Daytona, for sure.
Last couple things, John, then we'll let you go. So lots of interest, I would imagine, as folks are learning about this change in career path for you. I know that there are some drivers, whether it's sports cars, NASCAR, IndyCar, fans of flying the good old airplanes. I know Alexander Rossi is one that comes to mind. How many have you heard from? Whether they just learned about it here this week or maybe knew about it before, but what have you heard from some fellow drivers, or who knows, maybe former team owners, about this change?
Well, I've gotten a ton of messages. I haven't even had a chance to open some of them, and certainly haven't responded to all of them, but we'll do my best to do so. But Yeah, I got a call from Bobby Rahal that was I unfortunately missed his call, but he left a very kind message. I've gotten a ton of really nice messages from old teammates and things. Some couple of which knew I was doing it, but we're happy to see that the news was out, and a few that hadn't heard.
Asking for the hookup too, and the discount code.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't even get my sister on the ferry flights, and she's not very happy about it. So that can't go very far outside the family. But yeah, it had a ton of messages and kind words. I know I've inspired a few people to get their pilot's license. I know Kenton Cook and I've been in touch a lot. He just got his commercial rating. He's got a Bonanza, and I know Kuno Whitmer got his license because of me. So take credit for quite a few drivers catching the bug and kind of doing the same thing. And it's been cool to get all the messages. So it's much appreciated for sure.
So again, we're not saying you're never going to do race car driving again, but why don't we at least do a little bit of reflection before saying farewell to this episode, John? So I got to know you when you were coming up the junior open wheel ladder, that Star Mazda title, then a really intense season where you went on to win the Atlantic Championship yourself, fighting against Jonathan Somerton, Simone Di Silvestro. Simone unfortunately getting taken out by Marcus Niemela at the Corkscrew, I believe, the season finale. But there was a time where I was really convinced you were going to be one of the great young American IndyCar drivers, but you were one of a crop, achieved your success at a time where we were reconciling things. The old IRL and Champ Car were merging, and folks coming up winning Atlantic championships weren't necessarily being looked at as the number one option for IndyCar teams. What comes to mind there, John? Because you've built an amazing career afterwards. I know I look back and wish we'd had you in the big open wheel series at least for a little while, because I think you'd still be driving there if possible. But did you get close to anything with teams back then, and any regrets that that's not how things played out?
Definitely no regrets. I think, I guess actually the one regret I have is that I had a Champ Car test lined up, and we decided to turn it down because it looked like the opportunity, or I could still do the test, but it was going to cost some money. And we decided to save that money for there was a sponsorship money for some other endeavors. And that didn't really end up panning out exactly the way that we imagined. And so when I look back in hindsight, I could have just done the test and gotten to drive a Champ Car, which I think was at that time one of the coolest cars that's ever existed. And so I have, missed out on driving that for sure, but no regrets on not being able to make something happen in IndyCar. Obviously, the racing these days is incredible, but that's built up. I'm not huge into the ovals and the risk you have to take there. I think I would have enjoyed the game, the mental part of that, but I don't think that I don't think I could have reconciled the risk very easily in my mind. And so I don't have huge regrets about where I ended up. I loved my career. GT cars and especially the height of GTLM was exactly where I wanted to be. There was part of me when I first joined BMW that thought my goal and my dream would be DTM and, to move to Europe and be a factory BMW driver in DTM. But over the next few years that I joined BMW, I think that GTLM really took off, and I was really happy being in the States racing that category. So absolutely no regrets with how things ended up. And, I'll still watch IndyCar races from time to time, and it's great battles, and, would have loved the chance to drive the car. But ultimately, I'm really happy with where I had ended up.
I love your insanity. Not sure about IndyCar ovals, granted. Coming upon a front-wheel drive VW Scirocco that's going 100 miles an hour slow over a blind crest at the Nürburgring, not a problem.
Yeah, I never said it was rational, and I never said that the rest of the things I was doing were safe.
Well, fair point.
But
fair point.
But it's it's all what you're willing to risk and what the payoff is. I think for me, the payoff on the ovals is that you're playing chess at 230 miles an hour, whereas the payoff at Nürburgring is for me much more visceral.
No,
getting to push a GT3 car around there is unlike any other experience. And for me, I mean, nobody's excited when you see a front wheel drive Scirocco in front of you, or any of those slow cars. But for me, what was exciting about the Nordschleife is that there was no way that you could study to get better at that. There's a lot of work you can put in to do a quali lap. At Nürburgring, you do the top 30 quali and it's just you and the track. At every other track, you're going to have a lot of laps where you don't have traffic. But at Nürburgring, in the race, you're never going to have a lap without traffic. And even in qualifying before the top 30 session, you're never going to have a lap without traffic. And so for me, it was the variables that made the Nordschleife so enjoyable. And I loved the fact that you just had to figure it out. And that's part of why I loved IMSA racing, especially when GTLM was kind of in the middle, because we had the most action. We had the prototypes coming by us, and we had to pass the GTD cars because we had a little bit more power, but not a ton. So you had to really plan what you were going to do and make quick decisions, and it was all changeable. And so you had a ton of guys who could be really fast in the car, who couldn't quite figure out the traffic, and that applied in the height of GTLM, and it definitely applies at the Nürburgring. So that's the aspect of those types of races that I really enjoyed.
So you are one of a handful of folks who benefited from, he's now IMSA's president, that being John Doonan, but why don't we close on this? So had hoped you would be able to go upwards and open wheel. Didn't happen. 2 Mazda-powered open-wheel junior championships in a row. And without that IndyCar destination, Mazda, Doonan, and such made sure your career didn't grind to a halt. It was you and I believe Adam Christodoulou, the Newman Walks team. You got into sports car racing. Pretty cool thing. Blaringly loud, amazing sound. Of a Riley chassis, tube frame chassis, Mazda RX-7 carbon bodywork, and triple rotors, I believe, John, into Grand Am's Rolex GT class. And you could have seen your career stall, but the fact that Doonan and Mazda wanted to make sure that one of their young champs that they believed in fiercely was able to continue his racing career, albeit in a different series, different format. You talk about that, brother, because there's a handful of you who were given that opportunity to move and do something slightly different, but maintain that upward trajectory. I know that, and I was fortunate to see that and witness that in 2010, but you tell me about that, because when I think back of the many pivotal things to happen throughout your career, this isn't the only one, but I know this was a big springboard to lead you to where you are today.
That was the trigger that got me into sports cars. John Doonan and I were having conversations definitely weekly and sometimes daily at that point, which is kind of crazy to think about back at the time, being 18 years old. Having conversations with somebody that high up in a corporate company, but he was really, really passionate about what they were doing and what the target was with all of their ladder series. And so you alluded to it earlier a little bit, but that was a really interesting time in open wheel history. and it sort of screwed up the ladder a little bit. And so, Mazda had built this little system for guys to come up, and then all of a sudden the top level went away. So I won the level below that and had nowhere to go. Of course, it wasn't like I had a scholarship to go do a full season of Champ Car, but because everything was changing so fast and teams were trying to figure out how to adapt and buy new cars to go over to IndyCar and get rid of Champ Cars and what were we going to do with those and where was the money going to come from, it was a really tough time to break in. And so despite winning Star Mazda and Atlantic back to back, those were the two levels right below it. So I, in theory, had you would hope that you'd have your pick of teams at that point, and that's just not how it works in racing these days, and certainly not at that time with everything going on. So it was a really tough moment for me to realize it's not just about results. You can win you spend your whole career thinking you got to win, and then you win and you realize, oh, you got to win and do all this other stuff. You got to either find sponsorship or you got to find some way to break in. And so despite having back-to-back championships, I remember the best offer I got after my Atlantic championship was to go to do Indy Lights, which essentially was a sidestep. And the offer was, I think, for either $100,000 or $200,000, and then I was responsible for my own crash damage. And so, or maybe I was responsible for the first 100 of the crash damage or something like that. And I remember just being astounded on the phone, and that no joke was the best offer I found. I mean, I was talking to IndyCar teams and Indy Lights teams, and despite having such good results, that was the best thing I could find. And I said, look, I'm 18. My dad put a lot of money into my career coming up, and he's done. He's not putting anything up, nor do we really have that level to put up. And you're also talking about Indy Lights, which did ovals, and so the saying is there's two types of drivers on an ovals: those who have crashed and those who are going to crash. And a crash in an Indy Lights car was an easy $75,000. So we were looking at it saying it was going to be $200,000 or $300,000 to run that year. And then we were going to be back in the same boat the following year. So it just seemed like the wrong call. And that's actually the moment when I started applying to college, or started planning that process anyway. And so, getting back on John and Mazda, we were in touch a lot through that year. He was able to get me a seat at the 24 Hours of Daytona, so I was actually teammates with Jordan Taylor.
Yeah, Todd Lamb. I think Jade Buford maybe, and I feel like I'm
Jade and
Glenn.
There was one other because we had 5 people. That
Something
sounds right, actually. Yeah.
Wow. Racer's Edge.
It's been a while, and it's hard for me to remember because I actually never drove in that race. The car ended up having a problem. I think Jordan started and Todd got in, and had a failure, and so I ended up leaving around sunset, and that was a really disappointing way to start my first 24. Wouldn't be the last time that you leave a 24-hour disappointed. Seems if you have a long enough career, you have more of those races than you do the good ones, but at endurance races anyway. So I did technically enter the race at Daytona that year with Racer's Edge, and then they had a couple months off, and that gave enough time for John to work his magic and take the money that Chris Dulu had won for his championship, and they ended up reallocating that to sports cars. So we were able to get a little sponsorship money from Mazda to go to Speed Source and run the season at Speed Source, and that was a really fun year. We were we were the new young kids and just flat out all the time, and had some good results. We won at Lime Rock, which was an interesting race to compete in because it was a one-day event. I think it was on a holiday, maybe Memorial Day. And so because of Lime Rock not allowing any racing on Sundays, they decided to do the race on Monday, and we didn't have any practice because we couldn't run on Sunday. So we showed up practice in the morning, qualify in the afternoon, race late afternoon. And we had a brand new car that I'm pretty sure had, I wouldn't call it a shakedown, because I think the shakedown was really just somebody taking the car and driving it around the business park, which, if you imagine where Speed Source was based, and if you can imagine, a business park with a 3-rotor RX-8 blasting down there at full power, can only imagine what the rest of the businesses were thinking. So that was the shakedown for the car, and somehow we came out with a brand new car with essentially no shakedown, and won. So that was a really cool event. We had a bunch of other podiums that year, and then again, despite having a good year, budget ran out. We didn't have a ride for the following year, and that's how I ended up finding my way to Stevenson and ran the first year. That was the first year I ever got paid, was the year after I ran for Mazda. So, so John and Mazda definitely saved my driving career, getting me to compete, getting to show my stuff. And then a year later, I was getting paid as a race car driver.
I'm looking at a photo I took of you on pit lane, about to climb into that, I think, number 68 Mazda. I think it was round 2 at Homestead in 2010. And you got your Mazda branding, you got your Skip Barber visor strip, you got the Savage Designs logo, and then at the front, you've got a little red sticker with Snoopy on it and a little heart. And I forget the name of the bird from Peanuts, but I'm like, that's my guy right there. All right, man. I
didn't do that myself, but that was a driver coach that I'd had the previous year in Atlantics, and Mike Zemicki. He stuck that on one race, and I can't remember if we won the race or if we podiumed or something, but I remember thinking that's staying on there now. So I still have that helmet somewhere, and I'm pretty sure the sticker's still on it.
Good old Mr. Slide Rule. That's so awesome. Well, brother, I'm so happy for you. I don't know if you've been recognized yet by anyone who you've flown. Sports car fans aren't as populous as we'd hope, but you got to prepare for how you'll deal with that at some point in time. But
yeah, I'm sure I'll be fighting them off.
Yes, exactly. But congratulations.
I'm sure it's going to be a problem.
I seriously hope I get to see you at the racetrack before too long, because you got too dang much talent for folks not to give you a ring. But congratulations on the new career, my friend, and onwards and upwards from here.
Well, I appreciate it, and thanks so much for having me on a second time.
Hey,
great talking.
Right?